So the main point when we discuss about gastric ultrasound, what is POCUS? POCUS is basically the point of care ultrasound which we will be using in our day-to-day practice so that we can manage some difficult cases. Now, coming to why I am interested to tell you only about gastric and bladder, because they are the most widely used thing of importance to anesthetist. And then we'll again talk about the rush protocol. So let's start the videos. So it is, as I told now, it is a point of care tool for aspiration risk assessment. It can determine the nature of the content, whether it is empty, whether it is clear, or if it has a thick fluid, or even it has solids. What is important is when clear fluid is present, if its volume can be estimated. So, but it can be slightly difficult in finding patients who have an abnormal underlying gastric anatomy. So, what to do? Suppose the patient has a previous gastric resection or bypass, or there is a previous fundoplication, there is a band in situ, or there is a large hiatus hernia. In these patients, we may not be able to get a accurate amount of gastric secretion. So, what is the aim of doing this POCUS? First is that it should be a standardized gastric ultrasound examination. You should be able to identify the sonographic features of an empty stomach versus the one with clear fluids or thick fluid or solid content. Then measuring the gastric volume if it is an clear fluid, and then interpreting the findings and its implications for aspiration risk assessment. That is what our idea is. Now, what are the indications of getting an POCUS done? Suppose we feel there is a lack of adherence to the fasting instructions, which could be secondary if there is a communication error, or there is an emergency or urgent procedure, or there is an unreliable or unclear fasting history, which could be either due to a cognitive dysfunction or altered sensorium, or due to a language barrier. Or third, we feel there are certain conditions, medical conditions, where there can be a delay in gastric emptying, like pregnancy or labor, diabetes, severe liver or kidney dysfunctions, and some certain neuromuscular disorders. So, how do we start do the technique? So first is that we need to put the ultrasound machine in an abdominal setting. That is very important. Patient lies supine. If you are a right-handed person, you sit on the right side of the patient, facing the patient's face, and the monitor is in front of you. So both the monitor and the observer, they are on the right side of the patient. So the patient lies supine. What is the transducer that we can use? For a large child or adults, it's always you can use a curved probe. For small children, it can be linear. Now, always start in the supine position. Why it is important? In supine position, suppose you feel some amount of fluid, which I will be again enumerating later on, the volume is sufficiently large, then you can straight away say the patient has a good amount of volume and there is a high risk of aspiration, so you can stop the thing. Now question arises, what more can, then what we do is that start in the supine position, then make the patient turn right lateral decubitus. How do you scan? We just put the curvilinear probe at the epigastrium in the sagittal plane. I believe most of us must have been using the rectocyth block, tab block, this block, that block. Most of the time for those blocks we are using linear probe. Here we will be using a curvilinear probe. Usually in rectocyth or in tab blocks, we put it in a cross-sectional area. Here we will be putting it in the sagittal plane. So once you do that, you sweep the transducer from left to right in the subcostal margin. What is very important is that never call an empty stomach only if the patient is in supine position. Always make the patient right lateral decubitus before calling, yes, the volume of fluid inside is very less and we can go ahead with the surgery. Now, when you look at the ultrasound picture, it's always said the stomach is the window to the abdomen, and of the stomach, antrum is the window to the stomach. Now, question arises: why antrum? Because it is a very hollow viscous. It is a multi-layered wall. It is usually located very superficially, 3 to 4 centimeter normal population, maybe 7-8 centimeter in obese persons. You can very well distinguish it where it is present because it has a big structure that is a liver anteriorly and a pancreas posteriorly. There are certain important landmarks like left lobe of liver, pancreas, and aorta, and IVC. So why we need to know all this area is that because when you see a screen, you need to know what you are looking at. So you need to find out the left lobe of liver, you need to know where the aorta is, where the pancreas is, where the IVC is, where the supramesenteric vessels are. Then only we can find out where the antrum is. So the blue line that you can see here, the blue line, this is the line that we'll be looking at. So when you put it in sagittal plane, this is somewhat the left lobe of liver, and then this is the antrum is important, then the pancreas is here. So it is just juxtaposed between the liver and the pancreas. You also have aorta. The aorta is here, the vena cava will be here, the mesenteric artery will be there. And when you see the ultrasound image, if you can see, this is the cephalad part, this is the caudal, and this is the anterior part, this is the posterior part. You can see the liver is there, and you can see the colon is there, and then you see the pancreas is here, the small intestine here, the mesenteric vessels are there, aorta is here, vena cava will be somewhere around here. Even if you are seeing up to spine, whether you get such a good picture, it depends on the type of ultrasound machine you are using. You may get, because this is also an ultrasound image itself. Now, why it is important to know whether we have an aorta or a vena cava? The role importance comes only when we go to the next phase, that is the rush protocol. For that, we need to distinguish between aorta and vena cava. The most important point in aorta is that always remember aorta is a pulsatile, is only a single pulsatile because it beats at a single time. It pulsates singular pulsatile. That means if you put it, say this is the video that I am showing you, if you see, it will be pulsating same as that of our pulse rate. Just see this. So if you can see the this one, it is pulsatile only single time, not double time. Now when you go to the vena cava, this is the vena cava, right? I'll play this thing. You just keep on watching here, this part, how it is showing. Keep on looking at. See, can you appreciate there are two parts? It's beating twice here. Can you appreciate? It is beating twice. This was done in our setup in our ultrasound machine that we have in anesthesia department. So if you go to a bigger, better quality of ultrasound machine, you can also distinguish. Always remember, aorta pulsates once, IVC pulsates twice. So if you know how the IVC looks in the pulsatility part, then only you can find out it has a role in when you do the RUS protocol. Now coming to the gastric wall, why it is important to us? If you see, it has got multiple layers. It has got from coming from outside to inside. You have a serosa, you have a muscularis propria. It has a submucosa, then a muscularis mucosa, and there is a mucosal air interface. And if you see at the right side of the table, you can see there is an alternating layer of hyperechoic and hypoechoic. Hyper, then hypo, again hyperechoic. So these are alternating layers, and same way, those which are hyperechoic, they are also thin. So you have thin, thick, thin, thick, thin. Hyper, hypo, hyper, hypo, hyper. So whatever happens is that it gives you a squirrel sign. It tells you, okay, yes, this will only be seen in a very thin patient when you are putting the probe not sagittally but transversely. It's very difficult to see. The image that you are seeing, which is numbered, is a blown up image. Just to appreciate how the layers are. The whole idea of showing you is that these many layers are there, and that is the reason where we can see the antrum very clearly. Now, when you see an empty stomach, the antrum doesn't have any content. It's both in supine and the right lateral decubitus. So we call that a grade 0 antrum. It totally collapsed, and it's a very thick structure. It's a round to ovoid in shape and a bullseye. So if I can tell you, so this is the liver we are seeing. This is the cephalad. This is the caudal part. and we have put a probe here. This is the skin. So this is the left lobe of liver. This is the rectus sheath, and this is the pancreas. So the antrum will be here. So it has a very thin, thick ring shape. This is called a signet ring, where we can say a bullseye or a target pattern, and we tell this a grade 0 antrum. These are the superior mesenteric arteries, and this is the diaphragm. This is the aorta. Roughly, this is what we will look at it. Now, suppose a person has taken some amount of food, how it will look. So, if he starts with liquid, now the antrum, because it is a muscular structure, it will swell up and it will have a distended. Because it is swelling up, the walls will become thin. The walls will appear anechoic or hypoechoic. The size of the antrum is proportional to the gastric volume. That is very important, we should realize. Antrum size will let us know how much is the gastric volume the person has. And in a supine position, suppose you have a gastric volume, then when you make the patient come to the right lateral decubitus, the volume again goes up. So always calculate the volume of the antrum in the right lateral decubitus position. So here we have a person who has taken a lot of clear fluid. So you can see this is the antrum that we are getting. And the position should be always in right lateral decubitus to find out what is the volume. Now suppose he has taken some solid food. So what will happen? So this the antrum is there, but then will give you a frosted glass appearance. Frosted glass is something where we cannot see beyond a level. So we can see the antrum, it's beginning to, you can visualize the antrum, but below that nothing is visible, no structure is visible. So it is basically trying to go away from your place. Suppose after some hour, what happens is that if you can see that frosted glass appearance has gone, now the antrum is a very thin structure and it has completely filled with some sort of solids. So it has an hyperechoic structure specifically and very thin lumen you can find in this. Then another interesting thing is that suppose you have some bubbly liquids, some effervescent drinks you have. So what will happen to the antrum? Antrum will have these small starry sky appearance there. So you get a lot of these things happening. So that is called a starry sky appearance. So the whole idea now, what we have done is that we have deduced what is the type of fluid or food inside the antrum. Because from the antrum size, we can find out the gastric volume. Now comes the next part, the gastric volume assessment for the clear fluids. Always remember the gastric volume assessment can only be done for clear fluids, only and only for clear fluids. If it is as any semi-solids or effervescent fluids, unless it dries out, it is very difficult to find out. The cross-sectional area of the antrum, it has a linear correlation with the gastric volume. There is a model and it is related to the non-pregnant adults for volumes up to 500 mils. So what is the formula? The formula is that volume in mils will be equal to, this is a long, big formula, 27 plus 14.6 into the right lateral cross-sectional area of the antrum minus 1.28 into age. And then on the left side, you have a table where you have the right lateral cross-sectional area in centimeter and how much it should correspond with the age. That is the table you can have. So you can do this calculation, but then you have this gastric volume calculators. These are bedside tools. You just feed the volume, the cross-sectional area and the age in years, and you get an estimated volume in mils, how much it can be. Now, how it will help us? So let me discuss about this a bit more. So there is one way of doing it that we feed this in the gastric volume calculator and it gives us a value of the gastric volume. Second option is that suppose the cross-sectional area is 10 centimeters square, then we just need to square it up again. So if it is 10 centimeters square, then the volume will be roughly around 100 mils. So basically, if we are getting a cross-sectional area 15, then the volumes will be 225. If it is 20, the volume will be around 400. So you need to multiply the cross-sectional area, make the square of the cross-sectional area to get the volume of the gastric content. Now, why it is important? Because suppose a person of certain age, he also secretes some normal gastric secretion. And what is the normal gastric secretion? Now, the question, that value will be less than 1.5 mils per kg of the body weight. Suppose a person is of 70 kg. So roughly around 100 ml is the volume we are looking at the target. So we are looking at so that that volume is a normal secretion of gastric secretion, and that you cannot do anything about it. That means the person has not taken anything other than that. So suppose to get a value of 100 ml, you need to go back and find the cross-sectional area will be just 10. So if you keep it in mind, in an adult patient, if you're getting a cross-sectional area of only 10, then you are safe. If it's anything beyond 10, then that is difficult. So that is the basic idea with which we need to find. Now we have seen the content of the gastric antrum. Now you have done the calculation. For calculation, every ultrasound machine has a different calipers to calculate the cross-sectional area. You just take a perimeter and it will give you the values. All ultrasound machines have an algorithm to find out. It will give you a cross-sectional area. You just need to take that cross-sectional area and you can get a rough estimate how much the volume would be. Now, third part is that how does it help? If you know the volume, how does it help? Suppose it is a grade 0, that is both empty in both supine and right lateral decubitus. The volume implication is minimal and it is a low risk. Second, if it is a grade 1, there is empty in supine and clear fluid is visible in the right lateral decubitus, and the volume is less than 1.5 ml per kg that I was explaining to you, which is compatible with the baseline gastric secretion. So this is a low risk patient. If there is a clear fluid visible in both the positions and it is more than 1.5 ml per kg, there is an excess of baseline gastric secretion and there is a high risk. So most fasted individuals, more than 95% present a grade 0 or 1 antrum which correlates with the low gastric volume. And a grade 2 antrum is rarely seen in fasted patients. So you get both sensitivity and the specificity, and it is suggestive of a significant gastric volume. Now, how do you interpret the finding? So you have a flow chart. It's a qualitative examination. So basically you get three things. Either you get a solid or a clear fluid or an empty. Suppose it is an empty, it's a grade 0, so it is a low risk. No question asked. If it is a solid, it's a high risk. No question asked. Suppose it is a clear fluid, then you find out the volume. If it is grade 1 or the volume is less than 1.5 ml per kg, it's a low risk. If it is a grade 2 or more than 1.5 ml per kg volume, it suggests a high risk. So basically solids are high risk, and grade 2, where the volume is more than 1.5 ml per kg, is also a high risk. Now what will happen to the pediatric age group? Now in pediatric age group, you have a something different formula, and here the upper limit is 1 to 1.2 ml per kg, slightly low. But here you cannot make the square of the cross-sectional area, and you need to put the values to get the amount, how much should be the volume of that age group. Now, in a pregnant female, they have got very specific problems of their own. First is that there is a difficulty. There is a difficulty in the epigastric probe placement. There is a difficulty in epigastric probe placement. Gravid uterus, you have a gravid uterus, you have a moving fetus, you have a displaced stomach, you have a which is cephalad, and to the right, there is a fast and shallow breathing, there is a hyperdynamic circulation. Now coming, how do you need to optimize that one? So either it has to be semi-recumbent and right lateral decubitus position, or you can make a manual displacement of the gravid uterus, or ask the patient to take slow, deep breath and holding breath at end of expiration. So the sensitivity test is highest for solids versus fluids or empty states. These are few pictures of a, let me show you here, that is something I wanted to show. See, this is the uterus, this is the placenta, and this is the fetus. So this is the liver, and this is the antrum that you are seeing in a pregnant female. So it becomes slightly difficult to find out where the antrum is. But with use, one can find it out. Now, suppose in a morbidly obese patient, so the empty antrum can be identified in more than 90% of patients at a depth of 7 to 8 centimeter. Compared to non-obese subjects, obese individuals usually present with a larger antral cross-sectional area and an absolute fasting gastric volume. So, but they have a similar fasting gastric volume per unit of weight. So, mathematical model to measure the volume in subjects with BMI more than 40 is not yet available, but things are going on and probably they will be soon available. Now, what is the diagnostic accuracy of a point of care gastric ultrasound? This is a very good article that has come out in April 2018 in Anesthesia and Analgesia. It was a randomized controlled trial, double blind basically. There were 40 healthy volunteers and they were randomized, and they were two double blind. So basically they were given fluid and food, and then they did everything sort of things. What is important is that it has a positive specificity of 95% and a sensitivity of 95%. So they concluded that the bedside gastric ultrasound is highly sensitive and specific to detect or rule out a full stomach in clinical scenarios in which the presence of gastric content is uncertain. Actually, these are all the slides that you were seeing were part of the TACON 2018 in the where the book was I was taking. So you have all these signs in that. Now coming to the ultrasound of the bladder. So gastric part we have finished. I hope most of you must have gone through the gastric part, and you must have you at least you some idea you must be having now about how to do a gastric thing. Uh, Coming now to the ultrasound of bladder. So when we put the bladder ultrasound, the question is what can we see in an ultrasound? We can see a bladder wall thickening, trabeculation, masses, diverticuli, pre and post micturition volumes, ureteric junctions, calculi, foreign body. It's also as an acoustic window to assess the prostate and gynecological structures. Now the question arises, as an anesthetist, do we need to see all these things? How it is going to help us? You have a radiology department for all these things, so you don't need to see all these things. That's not our job. So where does the anesthetist come in? So here it is important to the anesthetist. First, it needs to differentiate between intra and extraperitoneal bladder rupture. This is very important. We need to know if a patient in shock. We need to know whether the patient has an intra or extraperitoneal bladder rupture. That is very important. Number two is the location of Follies inside the bladder. I had faced once this thing. We had a patient who is a multiple trauma who came in with a pelvic fracture, and as you know, we put an SPC in this patient, and the patient was absolutely fine on room air. He was weaned of the ventilator, and I was in the ICU. That was way back. I mean, 19 years back, really. And then I went back to home when I came back in during my senior residency time. So when I came back next day, I saw the patient is in ventilator, NORAD is at 15, ADR starting, DOPA running, everything. So I was really perplexed. How, man, what on earth could happen? Why the patient was absolutely fine? How could he go so bad so suddenly in overnight? Then we did an ultrasound and we saw that the SPCs that bladder what were put the thing, the drain has come out and now it is connecting to the peritoneum. So he was opened up, 3 liters of urine was taken out, then he came out of it. So it's very important to find out where the Follies is inside the bladder in any patient of trauma, specifically pelvic fracture. They're very difficult patients. And it also helps in ultrasound guided suprapubic puncture. Where to know exactly if a lot of injury is there, you don't know where the needle is and stuff like that. So that is also helpful. So how you do that? Again, here you make the patient supine with the suprapubic area exposed. You examine, again you are standing on the right side of the patient and the ultrasound machine is just in front of you. You're a right-handed person. First examine again sagittally in the middle, angle laterally and sweep the probe both sides, left and right, and check the lateral margins. What is important, you should check both the lateral margins to see the continuity of the bladder. If you see in continuity, there is a rupture in continuity, then there is a bladder rupture. First thing that we can find out. Then you rotate it in the transverse plane and sweep through the superior dome to the bladder base. All what is important is that a lot of times our scan should be from this is the dome and this is from here to here. You should do it this way. Now, a lot of time what happens is that it should be perpendicular to the bladder wall to see the bladder as clearly as possible. For that, a number of times we may need to pull this thing down slightly to so that the rays hit the bladder wall properly and we can feel the bladder. So when you put it transversely, these are the points where the ureters come out and join. Now, why it is important for us to know? Suppose the ureter, when you put the probe, the ureters keep on, they show some sign of micturition in there. So you need to keep the probe there for some time, maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds to appreciate if there is any urine is coming out. It's not something a blood will pass and you can see. It is urine will come out and it's a pulsatile flow. So you need to put it in a color mode so that you can see the flow. Next slide, I will be showing you that thing. We have this thing. Just keep on looking here. You have a blue and then you have some fluid coming here. There is one ureter here. This is one ureter here. Let's see this thing. Just pardon the sound. So just keep on this area. You will see the urine came and then you will again have here, again here. So this is what happens So this is what shows the continuity of the ureter, which is very important for all of us to find out, yes, the ureter is patent and it is now functioning. So now, as we have completed the bladder and the gastric ultrasound, now we are ready made more or less clear about how to go about and do a rush protocol. Now, what is rush? So rush was basically done. It's a what do you say? I should say, okay. It was a very interesting protocol that was done pretty late, so to say. It was decided in something around 2006, and it was then published in 2009. This was basically a rapid ultrasound for shock and hypotension. So it encompasses a lot of things. So it's not that a rush protocol only tells you about abdomen. It tells you about lungs, it tells you about the heart, it tells you about the abdomen, it tells you about the pelvis, it tells you about the long bones even, if you want to do that long. So it encompasses a lot of things. So rather than going for a fast, which is anyway part of the ROS protocol, we should be more clear about rush. Now, what is rush protocol? So as I told you, RUS protocol was the rapid diagnosed said as a rapid ultrasound for shock and hypotension. It was introduced first in 2006 by Wengnat, and later it was published in 2009. So it's less than 10 years old thing, not a very big thing. But in 10 years, we have learned a lot and we have done this. So why it is important? It is a very rapid and easy to perform ultrasound protocol. It takes less than 2 minutes. What are the things that we need? We need a phased array probe or a linear probe. You can have that. I mean, a curvilinear or a linear probe that you can have it. But I suggest if you are planning to go this, and in this pandemic of COVID, with all the protection to the equipment, you should use just a curvilinear probe and cover it properly so that you don't infect anyone. Now, there are components of the RUS protocol. There are two ways to understand this. One is there is a mnemonic. The mnemonic is HIMAP. So what you have is heart, inferior vena cava, the Morrison's or the fast abdominal views, the aorta, and the pneumothorax. The second option is that you divide it into pump, tank, and pipes. Pump is a heart that will tell you about the tamponade, the LVA, the RV size. Then tank is IVC, thoracic, and abdominal compartments, and pipes is basically large arteries and veins, the aorta, femoral, and popliteal veins. My interest in abdominal compartment, what is we'll be more interested will be in this part, IVC, and the other thing, IVC, the thoracic and the abdominal compartment. This is what a tank is, something where the abdomen is more concerned with. Now, why it is important? Suppose when you do a rush examination and when you tabulate into three different fields, suppose it is an hypovolemic shock. In hypovolemic shock, the pump, that is the heart, will be hyperdynamic. The tank, like a IVC, will be small and collapsing. You can have some fluid in peritoneal or pleural area. It could be a case of aortic dissection or an aneurysm. If it is a distributive shock, in the early sepsis, it could be hyperdynamic, or late sepsis could be poor contractility of the heart. But tank, it could be normal or small IVC. There could be some fluids, but the pipes are normal. In an obstructive shock, the pericardial part is more important. The heart is important. There is strain. There is poor contractility. The IVC is normal. In fact, IVC is enlarged, but it is non-collapsing. That is very important. And there is an absence of lung sliding. And pipes may in the aorta you can have some DVTs. In a cardiogenic shock, you can have a poor contractility of the heart. The tank, that is the IVC, it can be large or a non-collapsing. You can have some pleural effusion, but the pipes are usually normal. So when you put any patient of shock under these categories, we can find out where our problem lies. So I will be only talking about tank because it is very difficult to cover both pump, tank, and pipes in a single presentation. It's next to impossible. So first is evaluation of tank. Why it is? What do we do that? First is that we try the inferior vena cava. It is a phased array. We take a curvilinear probe, and we start from location is from subxiphoid level and slide to patient's right side. It tells you about the intravascular volume estimation. If the IVC is more than 2 centimeter in diameter and the inspirator collapse is more than 50%, then there is an hypovolemic condition. If it is less than 50%, then CVP is roughly around 10 centimeter mercury, and that's the 10 centimeter water, sorry, and that's fine. But this is not applicable for intubated patients because anywhere you are giving a positive pressure ventilation in any patient who is intubated. So in those patients, you may not appreciate this collapse. So what happens basically is that, as you can see, this is a no, this is the part what you are seeing. This is the liver part. This is the IVC part, and this is a non-collapsing part, and this is how it is collapsing. Now I'll show you video where I'll show you exactly how the collapsing is happening. Now the question arises, where should you put the IVC probe to realize that it is collapsing or not? There is a lot of argument in that. Whatever was decided is that you should do it where the hepatic veins join the outer, the IVC. The reason being is that that place will be fixed for every person. So suppose I go and see that yes, this patient is IVC is collapsing more than 50%. Then I start giving some fluids, some colloids, some blood products. After 2 hours, suppose my shift is not over or I have gone to some other patient, someone else comes and he puts the probe and then he sees, yes, it is okay or not. Then there has to be some single point where he can prove and where he can put the probe and find out exactly whether patient has been resuscitated or not. So this was for an abdominal thing. It is best to do it at the junction of the hepatic vein with the IVC. Now this is a video. If I can explain to you, see, these are the hepatic veins that is joining. This is the IVC. So we'll be seeing, I'll be showing in that how we are seeing that this was done in a bigger ultrasound machine. So the picture is slightly better quality. We usually do not show in our thing. Just keep on following that arrow marker. See, these are the veins, hepatic veins. It is confluencing and joining the IVC, and then you will see the IVC is there. See, now the IVC is there, and now see the IVC is very nicely seen. Now when I am putting pressure, it will collapse. If I am putting pressure, it will collapse. Now it is collapsing. So this collapsing is very important to find out the difference between whether the patient is hypovolemic or not, and what is the volume status of the patient. That is the IVC collapsibility. Usually we do not find a awake patient, lean and thin patient. But in this patient, we could do it. See the very nicely that the is showing. Now, next, once we have done the IVC, then we come to the abdominal compartment and the pelvic compartment. So this is a fast abdominal view. So you use a curvilinear probe again. So you see the hepatorenal recess, the splenorenal recess, and the bladder. You can also find out the internal blood loss. Suppose the volume of blood loss is more, you are resuscitating the patient, but you don't see there is no change in the hemodynamics. So that is very important. So internal blood loss, so you can also find out. Now, how you do about it is that you start from the right side. So these are the four things, locations that we will be seeing. First is a right costophrenic recess, then the right subdiaphragmatic space, there is a hepatorenal space, and there is the inferior pole of right kidney. Remember, we are only seeing always the inferior pole of both the kidneys. It's never the superior pole. Superior pole stays up. It's the inferior pole we are interested in. So, right costophrenic, subdiaphragmatic, hepatorenal, and inferior pole of kidney. As you can see here also, so this is the costophrenic, this is the subdiaphragmatic, this is the hepatorenal, and this is the lower part of the kidney. This is the cephalite, this is the caudal, this is lateral. You have put the probe on the lateral side of the patient. This is the medial side of the patient, and you are using a curvilinear probe. You can also use this cardiac probe, but it is very difficult to get for this because cardiology don't give this thing. Now, what we have got, I have got two samples for you just to see. Now, in this right upper quadrant, what we are seeing is that, see, this is the this is the hepatorenal recess that you are having, and you are having some fluid in this. The liver is there, the kidney part is there, and there is some fluid being collected here. So this is a free fluid which you can find out. Then you can also, there is no hepatorenal fluid here, but there is a pleural fluid here. This is the liver, this is the kidney part is there, but there is a pleural fluid is there. So you can have this fluid also. In the left side, we same have, but you have a costophrenic recess, but subdiaphragmatic space. Here you have a splenorenal recess. So again, it's the same thing. The costophrenic, the subdiaphragmatic, then the splenorenal, and the left inferior pole of the left kidney. And again, you here see the splenorenal space. So this is a thing of that one. See, there is no free fluid in the splenorenal place here, but there is free fluid around the spleen. So this is subdiaphragmatic region. But here they have a free fluid in the pleural region. So this is the diaphragm. So this way we can find out, if you see in a normal patient, then you can find out in an abnormal patient how it will look like. Then when you come to the bladder part, Here you see this is the bladder. This is a female bladder, and you are seeing in a transverse plane that I was showing you. This is the uterus, and so recto-uterine area is this one, and then you see this is the bladder. You need to see the whole bladder wall, and there is no rent in this one. But when you come to this fluid, here you can see some fluid is being collected here. So this is what we are looking at. This will tell us that this is about a rupture of the bladder. Now this is a male transverse pelvis. Here what you see is that you have a prostate, and then here you see the fluids are there. So the whole idea is that if you do this thing, you can find out a get good idea about how you need to do that. What is more important is that we start seeing in a normal patient, and then we appreciate the plain abdominal, plain bladder views, and then we can go ahead and do the rush protocol. See, I have tried to compile it in a very small area, how much that can be done in an 1 hour, roughly an hour class. But this is a very vast subject. You can just go on and on and on, and then you still find you have left so many things. But my idea was to give in a nutshell what is happening, because I had to follow Vidya madam and I am preceding Raghavendran sir. So it is very difficult for me always to be sandwiched between two big persons, and I am always at loss. Thank you so much. And if anything query is there, we can put it in the Facebook page and I can answer them. Thank you.